We got some great news for stock market investors and especially Nvidia stock investors as we got more details on the agreement between the United States and China on Friday. I'm going to share those details with you here and why it's such great news for Nvidia stock investors especially.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.
So details came out from the meeting between President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping of China. The U.S. tariff rate on goods related to the production of fentanyl will drop from 20% to 10% with the promise China would work very hard to stop the flow. I don't know what that really means, but as long as a promise is good enough, then a promise is good enough. That means overall tariffs on Chinese goods will be cut to 47% from 57%. There was also notes that the president could drop the other 10% from this 20% total, decreasing to 37% if the handshake agreement on what it means to work very hard, as long as President Donald Trump himself feels that the Chinese are working very hard, whatever quantification that means, then the other 10% could be dropped also. So we could be looking at tariffs as low as 37% on China. And this is huge because the threats were at one point that tariffs would be as high as 145%. So going from 145%, which makes it all but impossible for most companies, unless you get an exemption, to import goods from China. They would have to end that product line or move that production to some other Southeast Asian country or some other country where the cost of production is similar to the cost of production they were paying in China, because the cost of production to go from China to the United States is too restrictive for most businesses to continue that product. Most businesses, I'm noticing, will either move production from China to another country or just end the production of that product altogether. So China will pause some controls on exports of rare earth minerals. And this is a big sticking point because China has a near monopoly on not just the mining, but also the processing of some of these rare earth minerals. And so this has been a strong negotiating tactic, a tool for China to get the United States to come to the negotiating table and offer these kinds of concessions, like reducing the tariff rate from 57 to 47%, and also talking about reducing it further to 37% further. And here's where it's great news for Nvidia stock investors. The US will mediate talks between Beijing and Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang over China's use of restricted chips. Right now, Nvidia's chips, or the most advanced chips, are restricted from going into China, and its lower level chips, even though they have received the signal that they will be approved to go into China, the Chinese government has all but stopped buyers of that technology, not really happy with the situation and not wanting to allow Nvidia to go ahead and send those chips into China. Remember, the US government said they would be taking 15%, up to 15% of the revenue that Nvidia would generate from those chip sales into China. So I don't think China was happy with that arrangement. I think they would like to negotiate for better terms. I think China would like to say, if you want us to allow these rare earth minerals to go into your country, then we would like for you to allow NVIDIA's highest end chips to come into our country, because those are vitally important to us, just like the rare earth minerals are vitally important to you. And NVIDIA would hope to see that, because NVIDIA CEO has talked about the market for chips in China right now is around $50 billion annually, and increasing at a faster rate than is increasing in the United States, because they have a lot of catch up to do. They've been working with inferior chips and inferior technology. And if those businesses were allowed to upgrade to the latest and greatest technology, they would certainly accelerate their spending to get their hands on this technology while it's available. And so they would have a couple of years of making up to do. So sales for Nvidia could jump. I mean, Nvidia has market share estimated around 90% in the United States for these accelerated GPUs. So if you assume, now this is just speculation, but if you assume Nvidia captures, let's say 50%, not 90% of that $50 billion market, that could be an incremental $25 billion in annual sales for Nvidia. And if you account for the fact that businesses in China need to make up for the lost years, that could mean, 40, $50 billion annual incremental sales for Nvidia and the whole ecosystem surrounding Nvidia. So it could be a big boost for US semiconductor companies, Nvidia specifically, in gaining market share in China, a market that it's been losing out on over these previous few quarters because of all the increasing trade barriers initiated by President Donald Trump. Additionally, Trump said China would purchase more U.S. energy as part of a wider trade truce and hinted at an unspecified transaction involving Alaskan oil and gas. China will also resume buying tremendous amounts of U.S. soybeans starting immediately. Remember, China had stopped buying U.S. soybeans almost completely, so they will make up for that lost time and purchase some of those products that are waiting for purchase. The country hadn't purchased any of those. So China really negotiated and pushed back against the United States and these tariffs that were implemented. Nearly every other country didn't push back all that much. Canada is pushing back a little bit. Mexico is pushing back a little bit. But most other countries, the European Union, just accepted the fact that they will face higher tariffs and they didn't fight back all that much. But China fought back aggressively, using whatever tools they had at their disposal to bring the United States back to the negotiating table. And they won some nice concessions here in reduced tariffs and perhaps increased availability of some of the most advanced AI technology. Overall, it's a win for everyone if these two countries come back to the table and increase trade with each other. I think the more countries trade with each other, the less the chances are of a conflict that can spiral out of control. So, you know, come to the table, agree on whatever you feel you need to agree on so that you can go back to your base and tell them that you won something, right? So President Donald Trump is now, touring the United States and boasting about this deal and how good it is for the United States. And the Chinese president is likely doing the same back in his country, boasting about how good of a deal this is. So that's really the elements of a good deal if both leaders can go back to their countries and boast about what they got in return from these negotiations. And for investors, you just like them to reduce the hostilities and continue trade and let business go on as usual. And like I say, government's business does better when government just gets out of the way and lets entrepreneurs do what they do, create products and services that people enjoy buying and people value, and they value paying their dollars in exchange for the products and services that they're getting. Hey, if you value my process for researching stocks, I think you'll appreciate access to my spreadsheet containing my discounted cash flow valuations, which calculate a fair value for over 200 companies. It answers the question, what's a good price to pay for a certain stock? You can get access by joining our channel at the investor tier or above. See the link in the description or click the join button below to learn more.